How can you?
Really? No.
Because for the first time, it's like you're waiting for me to
Yeah, we
start.
are.
Usually, it's like you're already, kind of having a conversation,
Yeah,
when we start.
We'll start
You know
when
what I
you're
mean?
ready.
You never wait for me to start.
Normally,
Our conversations usually just
start,
start,
sort of
man.
rolling into it.
Oh yeah, we usually just roll into it,
Yeah.
man. It's not like we are all strangers here, you know. I mean, we know each other.
Yeah.
I mean, we know Macole.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know.
yeah. What we've had, thanks, Macole, for being here. I met you, was it last year, wasn't it?
Around that time.
Yeah, because your name came before. People have said to me, "Oh, you must contact Macole. Macole is this, that, and the other." And it was a real pleasure to meet you. And then in talking with you last year, you had the idea about doing this event at the university.
Yes.
Which we're going to do there's a second one taking place this November. Mm-hmm. But before that was even just talking to you about your studies.
Right.
I was really fascinated in that area of work there, and sort of like your background as well. These might be some of the things we want to touch upon, and also just sort of like some of your philosophy about life, and this particular. Well, our conversation, because this is what it is, our conversation is all the time trying to explore mental health issues as they relate to people of an African background. So that's where we're at, isn't it, Lungani?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and also just to find out how you are. Because, weird things like last Saturday I was at church. Yeah, I was at church last Saturday, and as we were coming out, we were shaking everyone, saying, like when people come out, shaking each other. Then there's this older lady. She asked me, "How are you?" She asked me how I am. I did that thing that we do as people, like, "Oh yeah, I'm good. But she paused and asked me again, how I am, and this somehow, kind of triggered me, and I ended up at the back with my wife in tears. Because for the first time, it's like I couldn't find an excuse to say I'm okay. You know what I'm saying? You know how it is. Sometimes we just carry on with every day, and
Well, that was something which Delroy Hall mentioned at a funeral once, where he said about, particularly about men, that we talk with one another there, so you're good pals with someone for many, many years, and all you ever say are things, but you never really ask, how are you? And you stay with, how are you? What you do is, how are you? Give me any quick response, I'm good, and move on.
Yeah.
Is that something which, resonates with you as a young man in what you do and how young men are now?
Yeah, most definitely. I think a lot of it comes down to, the barriers and the stigma around mental health, not just within the black community, but also just as men as well. The way that we've kind of been taught about mental health is that it's seen as a weakness. Like men, even me calling it mental health, like that's not necessarily the correct terminology. We're talking about mental ill health right here. Mental health is the broad kind of description of just health. It's like physical health.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So we won't talk about physical health in just a negative sense. We could also speak about it in a positive sense, and same as mental health, So, but the way that we've kind of been taught about mental health is that it's kind of predominantly negative, and it's seen as a weakness, and it inferiorizes us. And as black men in a system and in a society when we're already inferiorized and we're kind of weakened by a system, we don't want to kind of feed into that anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that point you're saying, that mental ill health rather than mental health, because that's mental health has a pejorative term to it there. So we actually keep a distance from it. We can't even raise it, because to raise it is to actually sort of like begin to feel, weaker, as you say, about it. And I know when I was growing up, we never mentioned mental health, even though we had people, we had in my family members who were unwell. They suffered from periodic bouts of mental ill health where they had to be hospitalised. But we never really talked about it. It was just there in the background, left there in the background there. And I bumped into someone recently, and he was asking me what's my work, and I said I'm at SACMA, and I was getting into this conversation which we're doing now, and he said, yeah, I've got a brother who's been in hospital for many years, and it was very clear that actually it wasn't something which he normally would talk about.
Yeah,
because there's a shame as well, isn't there?
for sure.
I don't get, I've never really understood, where the shame comes from, the fact that, cause it's not like sometimes it's not like something that you choose. It's like when you fall and you break a knee or something. It's not something you choose, it's something that just happens.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of colonial legacy attached to it, and where this shame comes from. Coming from colonialism, highly patriarchal in a sense where it creates this idea of what a man is supposed to be, and this westernized perception of a man is, hyper masculine, doesn't show any forms of weakness, doesn't also the mind is essentially used for thinking and for rationality and for logic. So this emotional side that is attached to the mind is not always seen. And then, as I mentioned before, we, especially within the black community, we are every day, the black man and the black community is stigmatized, is inferiorized. So, contributing towards that conversation of inferiorizing ourselves, because that's how we see it when speaking about mental health. We don't want to move in that territory like we're just surviving.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's. I mean, I know when I've said this before. First time I went to Jamaica, and it used to be said when we were growing up, "What is it about the black man in England that them all go mad?" And I think, and at the time I was very defensive of it. No. But I was defensive of it, of that sort of like badging, because I didn't want my community to be seen in that way, because it was if we were actually, people were saying, oh, the black community in Britain is this, that and the other, and I didn't want that at all there, or to be associated with that. So maybe all of those things were playing around at that time, and the trouble is that people are saying, when they're asked, are you okay, if they are asked, they're okay, when they're not okay, and therefore in not being able to share some of the trials and tribulations. And also the other thing to throw out here is the amount of psychological and emotional, never mind financial investment, which has to be put in place to actually immigrate.
For sure.
That whole thing there, it's not just you either.
For sure.
A whole family and extended family there. There's a lot of investment. So you're going to come back and say you've gone over there and then you've gone mad.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, sorry to use that sort of term, but that's how it was seen.
That's the thing.
Where the grass is greener and the roads are paved in gold.
Yeah,
for sure.
And people sending money back home, etc. there, and working all hours, whatever there, gives an impression there for things. You're comparing everything with what you've got. But it was such a pressure for us back in the day there, and there still is a massive pressure to this day. So I'm not trying to make out that things are vastly improved, but compared to what it was, and you grow up with that. And I think your point there about the physiological sort of impact of internalizing all of this, and then you go into these sites of interaction such as school and the workplace, etc. there. That you can get a physical reaction.
Right.
You do get. We've all had physical reactions.
No, that's true.
I go to some place there. I go, okay, then I'm just going to have to compose myself.
Right.
There's some deep breaths here.
100. And I think a lot of it also comes down to just as a black community, not having that understanding of what mental health is. I always trace it within this colonial context. During colonialism, the black body was disembodied. The mind, the body, the spirit was completely stripped apart. They were seen as separate entities, not as one, which is very at contrast to, especially in African philosophy of seeing as one. So we have been disembodied, we have been disconnected from our mind, from our mental health. So when we are asked conversations about mental health, and we may be carrying something, we may be feeling impacted, we might be feeling down, but because we don't have that language and we don't have that understanding about, you know, our emotions and feelings and what it feels like to feel, you know, because we've been so disconnected from that. And we've been so dehumanized. It's hard to then be human when asked those questions about how are you.
That's it. So for you, I mean, why? I mean, your PhD is around. Actually, why a PhD in the first place?
Why a PhD? I never planned to do a PhD. I never even planned to come to uni. Like growing up at school, football was my thing, and I was like every young boy. Like my mind was just set on being a professional footballer. And then 16, I didn't get a scholarship or a pro contract because I was at academies at the time. I was at Sheffield Wednesday in Chesterfield. And I was then kind of, as a backup, I was just put university. So as it turns out, I ended up going to university. There then become a scholarship available to do a master's in psychology and education, which is it was put out there for black students that are from quote unquote challenging backgrounds, and I fit the criteria for that for some reason. And then I then went on to study a PhD. And I guess for me, I've always had this understanding and knowing that my purpose is to help my community and my black community, for sure. Like I've always known this. And the way that just the stars aligned and, you know, just the way that things happened, it seemed like the PhD was going to be the route and is the route for me to help liberate my people and bring light into our community.
So, I mean, going back actually even prior to the PhD, what was your space within the education space? How were you? Were you like one of those where knowledge just comes naturally?
No, not even. I will put it down to hard work and passion. Like I would never describe myself as being academic. People would say otherwise, but I would never do that. Like I find essays hard. I find reading pretty boring. Like this is not necessarily something that I enjoy doing, but I do have a passion for it, and the hard work gets me over the line. And especially within kind of an academic, you know, environment such as like a Russell Group uni, like University of Sheffield, like fully don't feel like I belong here. Even now, I remember like my first day of undergrad, and my first class was a sociology class, and I've gone in there, and like the room was full of kind of just middle class white girls who've kind of been to private school. They've got kind of, you know, Jack Wills hoodies and Starbucks and fresh MacBook Airs, and that was kind of the room I walked into. And then it was me, the only black person in the room, the only black student. I didn't have a laptop at the time, couldn't afford one. I just had piece of paper and pen, and I was like, raw, like do I even belong here? Like should I even be here? And then as kind of time went on, I started to kind of realize, you know, I've got a lot of life experience I can draw and a lot of life knowledge. And then when we started kind of getting into race modules, I was like, yeah, like I can feel with this.
So this was when you first started at the university.
That's right.
So you've had all your academic career at the University of Sheffield.
That's correct.
So you go from that place there where actually you walk into a room and it's like only you.
Right, for sure.
Which is, you know, we're at the university today, and we had the president of the African Caribbean Society with us earlier. And that is something which, you know, although when I come to university now, I see many more black faces than when I was at the university, which is many years ago. The experience will still be that in your day-to-day experience, in a course, in a class, that it's likely that you are going to be the only black person.
Yeah.
And that's still quite, and in a place like it, it's still a frightening prospect, isn't it?
I know. It must be daunting.
Yeah.
I mean, you got no reference in terms of like what the president of the society was saying about she has yet to meet any black staff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they are black staff, but this is such an enormous place So
That's
actually,
it.
you could go your entire 3 years or 5 years, whatever it is there, and you won't meet a black member of staff there because they're not that many.
No.
That's it, that's
and you couple that with all what a university
For sure.
has with it.
Now, I'll tell you the craziest thing as well. I'll give you some tea right now. Like, even within the University of Sheffield, I've had experiences where, I mean, I went from my whole undergrad kind of degree not having any black lecturers or any black teachers, right? And then it wasn't until kind of going to master's and PhD level where I started meeting more academics and finding more. And I remember so many times within my kind of experience of being a PhD student in particular, where I've gone to a conference or a meeting or an event, I've seen another black colleague or academic, and I've kind of gone over to chat to them and be like, yo, like, what's good, man? You know, we're the kind of only ones in the room. But their response was completely like, I'm not kind of one of you, you know?
And you know, you're smiling, and I do recognise that.
For sure.
I recognise that from the sense of that, you know, you're talking about some people who, even if they did have it earlier in their life, it's been schooled out of them in terms of the times they've had in terms of, you know, their education, because, you know, some of the people we've talked with here who are students, you know, we had Tosin last week. He talked about when he was at the primary school, there was lots of black kids, and he went to the secondary school, it was more mixed then, but he's now doing a medical degree here in his 5th year. So if you think of things like a pyramid, there's a filtering out.
For sure.
And in that filtering out there, you get more and more experiences where you're on your own. So you actually, I'm saying there is a possibility that some people are going to feel so unused.
For sure.
To being in the company of other black people that it makes them uncomfortable.
For sure.
And I would say, as I was saying before, downstairs, I think that's a part of something which contributes to what we see at SACMA about black men who are graduates who have a nervous breakdown.
So
I wish I could explore it more.
Yeah, because I mean, you say it's been, you use the term, it's been schooled out of them.
Yeah, because I think the education is a process.
Yeah.
So it's an active process with what you, from your studies there, where the choices are being made about what's going to be on the agenda, you know, how things are framed, and they can be so framed that actually there's a filtering out of loads of things in education. You know, when they come at 5 to school, you filter out lots of things about the home, etc. This is how we do it. You know, you remember your child at 5 or 6 when they go to school. Suddenly, it's what they do at school which is the important thing. Not what they're doing with you. Do you imagine when you get to 11, you get to 16, you get to 18, and you're not talking to your parents about, you know, your time at university, because they won't understand it anyway, because I'm going to be talking about this, that and the other. So you end up that actually, you know, you're on your own. And what I think I've seen is that, and what I'm interested in this, which is, I tell you what, I got interested in this when I read the biography of the actor. I can't remember his name now. David
Hayward.
Yeah. And he went to RADA.
Yeah, he went to RADA.
And when he came out of RADA, he had 2 episodes of psychosis.
Yeah.
And those episodes of psychosis occurred once, you know, when he was at RADA, he just thought everything was safe. You know, everyone took him for what he was. But he comes out of RADA, he has his first couple of performances, and I think he's in a performance where he's Romeo in Romeo and Juliet. So we're talking here about the late 80s. And the reviews of it were, you know, essentially, here is this black man playing Romeo. So he was having to face this racialization of himself there, which he thought wasn't there. And in that, he has his breakdown.
Wow.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's it.
And I think there is something about the university experience which can make it that way. I mean, and you think about the guy last year in Nottingham who he killed the 3 people. He'd been at Nottingham University, so he'd been brought up in Wales, Pembrokeshire, then goes to Nottingham University to do engineering. And for me, I just saw and do see this sort of like, this is somebody who has been racialized, somebody who has been so minoritized or whatever there, that actually this has broken him.
That's it. Cause I mean, like, I think you alluded to this, that the trauma as one enters these institutions. Sometimes we send our children to other parts of the country, so to speak, to learn, and we don't really factor in the fact that it's going to be a foreign space. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think there are any systems in place to actually make sure that they are protected, or at least they are. Because there's something about being around people who are inherently who look like you, or at least who exude the same experience, which will kind of the unspoken. And then you get to a place where you are just the one. And then suddenly you start noticing yourself and start noticing your own processes and stuff within an environment sometimes that is never really made with you in mind.
Yeah.
So it's probably, I don't know, maybe somebody has probably got like a paper written on the...
It's true. Like, if you look at the university as an institution is historically violent and racist, and a lot of this is down to, once again, down to colonialism and slavery, where anthropologists would go to Africa in kind of for research, and what they would do is they would observe African people, observe kind of their behaviors, how they lived and what they was doing. They would interpret what they thought they was seeing, and then report back to the metropole, such as the UK, for example. Report back, say, this is a particular group of people, this is how they act. Okay, now let's make a strategy and a tactic of how we can colonize these people. So this was kind of like the first form of research that we started to see kind of within an institutional context, right? And over time, you know, that has been the foundation in which universities have become to be built. And you can see across many universities how they have strong ties to colonialism and slavery, and you know it's built into the very fabric of what they are today. So much money is based off colonialism. We can even, you know, University of Sheffield is so much controversy right now about, you know, their affiliations with kind of the war and kind of genocide and what's going on over there, so, and Gaza. So even now we can still see how this ties with colonialism and the university, and how the university represents a very racist and symbolically violent place.
But that's the thing. I think, you know, like even if you look at this, I mean, the African saying of, until the lions learn to speak in the tail of the hunter will always be celebrated. So the one who writes the narrative will always, you know, kind of skew it so that it benefits them. And hence why, you know, like sometimes when I speak to most of my conversations around SACMA is, if we are going to write about, we have to have our own record in terms of our experience, to be able to either arm those who come after us, our children, our grandchildren. We will have to own our own intellectual property and our own narrative that says our own experience from our own viewpoint, because otherwise we will always subscribe to something that's written by somebody who basically had their own viewpoints in terms of how they want us to be seen.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying?
So, you know, in terms of, for me, we've talked there about the university. How does that relate then to, you know, in a sense, below university, you know, the schooling which takes place? And that's what your PhD is about, isn't it? Is there a sort of connection between the two? I mean, I use the idea of a pyramid. I might be totally wrong.
Yeah, no, most definitely. You know, the school education system starts from nursery age, where, you know, it's PE parents are paying hundreds and thousands just to get their kids into a good nursery, so they can go to a good infant school. So then they can go, which is a good feeder school for the best primary school, which so then they can go to the best secondary school, get the best A levels, go to the best sixth form, and then go to the best university. So it starts right from the bottom.
And there'll be quite a number of black students here who've experienced that. I mean, if you passed the high school in Birkdale, I went past there last year, and at first I thought, is that King Ted's or is that somewhere else? Because there were so many black and Asian kids there. I was like, it can't be the high school. That's my own sort of prejudice coming out there, preconceived ideas. Actually, but people are making a massive sacrifice financially so that they can actually be in that position that their child goes to one of those schools there where they think they're going to get the qualifications at GCSE and A level, which will then open the doors for them to get to a university like Sheffield.
Listen, one of the main reasons why I'm here today is because of my mum. So where I come from, I'm from Wincobank. So I lived in Sharrow, and then I moved to Wincobank. And all the kind of schools around my area, you know, on paper, well, just keeping it real, aren't the best schools in Sheffield, right? And my mum kind of saw that and recognised that from a young age, that in order for me to have the best opportunity in life, coming from where we come from and in our area, in order for me to have the best opportunity, education would probably be the best path to kind of keep me on the right track, right? So what she did is she insisted that I wouldn't go to a school in my area. She made sure that I went to one of the best schools in Sheffield, which was Silverdale at the time. And in order for me to go to Silverdale, I had to go to the infant school of Clifford, which then went to Exel, and Exel fed into Silverdale. So I can even just use my experience as an example in this sense, where at the beginning, you know, my mom would have to sacrifice kind of driving me before work. She'd have to get up early before work, drive me to the other side of Sheffield and drop me off there and then pick me up. And I was blessed in that sense that I could even had a parent to do that. But as I got older, it then meant kind of having to catch like 2 buses to school, 2 buses backwards, and that sacrifice was there from the jump. Whereas like there'll be other kids in my class, like say I was late, for example. One thing that really used to annoy me is if I was late because maybe the bus was late.
They didn't care.
They didn't care. They said, well, you should have got up earlier. But at the same time, they've got little James sat next to me who woke up an hour after I did, an hour and a half after I did, brushed his teeth, had his sandwiches packed by his mum, and then he walked to school, which was 10 minutes.
Yeah. My two went to, well, my eldest went to King Edward's. They went to Lowfield, and then they went to King Edward's, and she went to King Edward's, did 2 years, and she wrote us a letter saying she wanted to leave. She was in the top class. No one ever said anything positive about her in that top class. She went to Abbeydale in the end, and both my children went to Abbeydale. So a lot of the kids she went from Lowfield up to King Edward's, they really didn't do very well. So was that something similar you saw as well, that people who were not from that local area, that actually as black kids, that they were in a sense, we're nearly letting you in?
Yeah, for sure. You know, within those kind of schools like Silverdale High Stores, you know, the ones around that in the south of Sheffield, right? Education is prioritized a lot more, and it's, you know, it's very much a part of the whole system, whereas kind of, you know, the schools kind of in my area, it's more about, you know, you just go there and you just go be with friends, and then things lead to another thing. So I would definitely say that. But I would also say that in terms of that sacrifice as well, it wasn't all kind of, you know, me going there has enabled me to go to university and everything's blessed now, because it's not that at all. Like, as part of that experience, you know, being the only black, you know, student in a classroom has been a massive part of my whole education experience from them times. Like going to those schools and being completely different. School holidays would come, they would go Centre Parks, and then I would go to the park. Yeah. Like, and that's how they spend their 6 weeks. Now I spent my 6 weeks, right? So kind of there was so much of a difference, and from the earliest age I always remember feeling so alienated. Yeah. Because class is a massive thing as well. Yeah. You know, the class differences, and you know, being in that kind of a middle class school as a black working class background boy is very difficult.
So that notion of class then, is that something you see at the university that actually, I know when I was at university, we would have African students, and they invariably were people who had a bit of money behind them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and I always thought that they could never understand British-born black youngsters there. I think it's different now. But is that something you see yourself there, that, you know, you would have people at this university who are essentially, to want of a phrase there, middle-class blacks?
Yeah, no, for sure. Definitely. I think also you make a really good point in terms of looking at the cultural kind of differences between Caribbean and African, I guess, migrants as well. You know, we do see far more African students within universities, and a lot, and the class aspect is a part of that. You know, the kind of a lot of the African migrants that have come over to the UK, it means, you know, they've come from some form of wealth or some form of, you know, they've got some money behind them, and that's kind of the reason why they've been able to come here, which is I guess a different migration story compared to the Windrush generation, right? So we definitely see how class is part of it.
Well, we had Chuck there, didn't we? And Chuck was he was sort of like couldn't believe some of the experiences he's having here when he's thinking, back home I would.
Right.
Oh,
It was very much, back home I am.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
But here I'm just black. But back home I am something.
Sure.
And that is quite a hard thing to actually sort of like square. But when you've got somewhere else to go to, and I think that's another part as well, which is, I mean, when Lungani and I have been talking over the past 6 months on this podcast, one of the things I've said quite a bit recently is, I will die here. I was born here and I will die here. And I know nowhere else. Now, that's not necessarily the most positive thing I can say. That's just that's the truth.
That's the truth.
But I haven't got somewhere else. I mean, you've got somewhere else. I mean, I can say Jamaica, but I don't know Jamaica. I don't know Jamaica. That's the honest truth to it.
No, but this is the weird thing.
Yes.
You know what? It's I mean, we're talking about, I think we're talking in the last conversation we had, we're talking about, you know, like my niece who said that when I asked her, I said, so where is home for you? Where do you feel most at home? She this is a kid who was born in Zimbabwe and she grew up here. And she said she carries home with her. You see, she travels quite a bit, and she says she carries home with her.
Yeah.
Because I think for some of us, there is this understanding that the moment you leave a space, even for a month, when you go back, it doesn't feel the same. And so you become like a nomad. I mean, personally, I have never felt like I fit anywhere, and that is a different whole podcast. But
well, it's one that I share as well. I feel marginal.
You know what I'm saying? So I have always felt like, I was saying I was speaking to Kambinga recently. I said, I feel like the guy behind the curtain.
Peeking.
Peeking and looking people as they do life. You know what I'm saying? Same way I felt on Sunday when I went to the black-led
the Windrush.
Yeah, the church event I was at. Sometimes, as much as I'm involved in a variety of stuff and they're happening, and I am known, and I know a lot of people, and that's the reality of, I am so involved in everything that's happening, but then suddenly you realized that you are the other.
So what made you, at the Windrush celebration, what made you feel slightly outside of it?
It's just me. I'm weird. It's just
no, man. There's more to it.
No. But this is the
I would
thing.
say at least maybe where you wasn't born here, right?
No, I wasn't born here,
so
but
that's got to be at least one element to contribute towards that.
But this is the thing. To put it kind of bluntly and as bleakly as I can, it's that constant search for belonging, even in my own home.
There it is, and that's not weird. See,
You know
this
what I'm
is
saying?
like, sorry, just to pause you here, but this is when we're talking about black men and mental health and understanding of emotions, right? You know, I knew there's more to it. It's not because you're weird. It's deeper than that. And then when we asked him again, he took that time, he kind of brought back the layers, and then it comes down to belonging, which is so connected to our health and our wellness and our mental health and well-being. And that's kind of just a live example of how it happens, right?
Yeah. And I think that thing about belonging, because I mean, where you feel, you know, I was talking, my son's adopted, and one of the things which I think about adoption is that as a father of an adopted child, is that actually you're always mindful that actually there's always this original sort of, you could see it as abandonment, and therefore how does that affect a child? No matter how much love you may give them, how does it affect them? Fact that actually that's a factor. Does it give them less confidence about something? Does it give them something, whatever there? So belonging to me is a little bit like that. It's nearly like attachment there. That I feel like I'm part of something unconditionally. And I don't feel unconditionally a part of Britain, if you want to call it that. But I don't feel unconditionally Jamaican. Because I don't.
So you are in the liminal space.
I'm in something where I'm sort of like, I feel much more a part of the black British community. But that's often quite sort of spatial as well. You know, you're from Sheffield, you're from Nottingham, you're from the people you grew with, etc. there. So it's got that element to it as well. But I think belonging there is actually the key thing for a lot of the difficulties which we experience, because you go into a school setting, you don't feel like it's yours. It's not designed for you. It's designed for a particular type of student, and that's not you.
For sure.
And, you know, I've heard students talk before who are, say, from a middle class white background, and they'd go, it's all of these things, etc., etc., etc. But I just knuckle down. I don't enjoy it. You know, you probably heard that. They don't enjoy it just because you see them working away hard. They don't enjoy it, and they don't have this sort of like, you know, the little set to. They go, you know, I'll just let them do what they do. I can't be bothered, basically. Because it doesn't trigger them in the same way as it might trigger somebody else.
For sure. Before I don't want to skip on what you said, because you was getting deep, man. So you want to just continue what you were saying, connected to the point of belonging?
No, I was gonna say, you know, like I mean, to your point, you were saying that it's gonna be like a means to an end. You know, sometimes we find ourselves in this space, in these spaces, because it's just a means to an end. It's a way for us to. We have been told that, you know, kind of attending this institution, going to education or whatever, it's gonna be a way for us to move up in this rung of this life ladder that sometimes nobody really kind of gives us any reference about. There is no reference, because for me, I didn't grow up with people who were academics, except the people who taught me. But even within those spaces, I mean, I didn't have like a relative who was well educated to a point that actually I had a cousin who turned out to be weird later in life. You know, he spent, you know, a few years in prison, but that's another story again. But for me, actually going back to the whole point of belonging, I think is because we pride ourselves. I mean, like, you know, what do you call it? This people wanting to know their genealogy and stuff. For me, on my father's side, it ends with my father. That's it. On my mother's side, I was raised by her parents, and that's it. And beyond that, there is nothing. And for me, and I think later in life, I think, you know, the whole idea of neurodivergence has always been a thing. You know what I'm saying? But with us, it was different.
Yeah, I mean,
you know what I mean?
I watched that program, Whose Life Is It Anyway? And two in particular I've watched recently. One was Jessica Ennis, and the one I watched last week was Naomi Harris, the actor. Now, she was able to go back to her fifth generation grandfather, which is 1808, which is extremely rare for anyone who's been enslaved. Her family enslaved. But she was able to go back to 1808. I think it was a baptism record they had at the time there. And I'm like you, and back to this notion about belonging. about, I don't know beyond, in fact, I never knew my grandparents, so I can just cut that as a line then. So there's no less connections, there's this familiar connections which actually can be quite supportive and whatever there. And then if you leave home and you have to set somewhere else, because you've talked about when you went back to Zimbabwe, was it this summer or last summer?
This
summer
May.
there. May, and feeling I'm slightly again marginal. You go home and you're marginal again. And that'd be many people I know who went back to Jamaica a number of times and and they've been away for 15, 20 years and then go back and think, well, it's home, but I can't live here now.
I just want to add as well, like a lot of that loss that we
because it is a loss, isn't
that we
it?
feel, right? That is truly validated when we come to understand, particularly from an African cosmological view of ourself is deeply connected with our ancestry.
Yes.
No, that's it.
Yeah. Deeply connected with our ancestry, the ancestors, veneration of the ancestors, understanding who we are, where we come from, practicing the same practices of our ancestors, speaking to our ancestors, being in connection with them, right? Like that is a massive part of the African worldview and cosmology.
Yeah,
connected to God, connected to the body, connected to the mind. All one thing.
That's
all
it.
one thing.
And they're ripped apart.
And that's been completely stripped apart from colonialism, once again, completely stripped apart, taken away. And now that part of ourself, that spiritual connection to self, land, God, each other has been removed.
Yeah.
And that's why we feel this lack and this part missing from us, whether it is coming from Zimbabwe or it's coming from the Caribbean. That's one thing that, it has been kind of...
So that sounds very much like another way of looking at it is that atomization, isn't it? That we've basically just turned things into this you.
Literally, the individualization.
And the you isn't, not strong enough. The you on its own is on its own. And we need more than that, don't we?
What's his name?
Ubuntu.
Yeah.
I am because we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? The I is defined by the collective. The singular is defined by the collective. But we live in a society where it's I am because I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the I is different to not you. And we are not an R. It's all singular.
Yeah, because I was watching a clip of these two South Africans speaking about the concept of Ubuntu. And they were saying that, which was to me, it was so strange because these two white guys who obviously still have some of their privilege. And they are saying that the concept of Ubuntu basically means that we are being dehumanized. They say they're dehumanized, and then saying that Ubuntu does not really apply to them. And then this young lady then says, well, to be honest, it's not so much that Ubuntu doesn't exist within your community. It's just that you have always been a community of people who have always had individual interests to a point that collectivism sometimes even serves the individual. You know what I'm saying? Remember when it used to be the Jackson 5 and then suddenly it was Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5. So you take away the individual from the group and let that one person shine, and then they become a target. They are hated by...
And then it was Bob Marley.
Then it was Bob Marley by the way.
Bob Marley.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? So I think the systems there understand that we are a collective people and we strive in that environment. And then what they will do, they'll pluck you out of that environment and put you in an environment that's...
But there's a symbiosis, isn't there?
Yeah.
The two interact together there. And actually when they interact well, which is what we want, then actually that must be healthier than when you pluck someone away from that. And we're here at this setting here, we talked a lot about the university, and in some cases, I'm not saying all, I'm not even saying the majority, I'm just saying in some cases that's a very difficult process, and essentially you're the one.
For sure.
Yeah, and you're having to adapt your whole self to it, to the point at which that actually these interactions there are taking something away from who you were and who you are. You don't even know who you are anymore. That's the problem. You can wake up one day, you don't know who you are.
As somebody who, you have an allotment. If you take a plant from Spain, different soil, different environment, different everything, then you try and come and plant it here.
With different food,
it dies.
Different sunlight.
You see what I'm saying?
But then the problem with that line is that
sometimes it dies.
The nativist line, because that is the line which many of the right wing, far right wing, they talk sometimes environmentally about all these native plants. We don't want all these invasive, etc., etc., etc. There, things can adapt.
No, I don't think.
If you have a desire to adapt, you can adapt. The trouble is that the society at large doesn't want to adapt.
No, but that's what I'm saying is, I mean, people can adapt.
And society can adapt.
Society can adapt. But fundamentally, for one to actually break away from what has been to forge something new, there is a crisis.
Yeah.
And if we look at people who come from the other parts of the world to come and live here, and then suddenly realize that had it been a very supportive environment in which they find themselves, where they can flourish and become greater versions of themselves. But unfortunately, the environment that we come to and we are part of is harsh. It's very harsh. It was never made with us in mind. You know what I'm saying? So what you do is you suddenly get to a point where you are just surviving. Yeah. And many of us in this part of the world are surviving. We are literally, you're constantly having, what you call it, that sense of you're on the back foot all the time because you don't know something's going to kick off. I mean, that's what we saw a few months ago, you know, with the
race riots.
The race riots. So, you see what I'm saying?
So with your study again, just picking up on that point there, and I was just thinking as you were talking there, Lungani, do you think from what you see in schools that actually the racism which people are encountering is amplifying and triggering many of the things which we all come with a particular set of whatever we are. Does the racism and in a sense amplify what's there already, or is it something which is innately contributing to how people feel?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to understand schools is not separate to society but as a microcosm. Right, so the structures and the system and society that surrounds schools feed into the schools. As they say, they have a symbiotic relationship, right? So that gets put in there. So a lot of these kind of, a lot of the racism that young people face, a lot of the feelings, a lot of their perceptions and experiences of school are based on being a black person outside of school, and then how that is then perpetuated and amplified within a school system and a school setting where they are just racialized to just a walking black body.
And it's interesting that because when I was in education before, I once saw a situation where the police came in. And the police used to come in all the time for all sorts of different things. And this youngster ran away. And some colleagues said, why are they running away from the police? And I said, well, it's understandable. They were like, it's not understandable. It's understandable. There's no, great sort of, there's a distrust, bottom line distrust there.
Sure. This is what
but these teachers couldn't see that, and it was a little bit similar to the Sarah Everard case there, where Sarah Everard there, she implicitly believed the police, that the police would look after her, not that the police would abduct her and then rape her and kill her. But I can't think of any black person I know who implicitly would trust the police in that particular way. The off-duty police comes and says, get in my car. And I'm not trying to in any way at all dismiss the horrors of that, but it highlights a difference in terms of our perception of the police there.
And this is what I'm actually researching. Actually, it's interesting you brought that up because one of the one initiative that the government bringing in right now is to employ more police officers in schools.
Oh, absolutely.
And this has been put in place to try and mitigate knife crime and gang crime, right? But coincidentally, what we're seeing now is we're having high numbers of, police officers being in predominantly black schools.
Absolutely.
Schools. So, and what we're seeing from that now as a result is the policing, the racialization, the criminalization, the the way the relationship that the police have with the black community that exists in the community is now coming into school systems. And this is a problem because for most young people, especially if you do come from, a home of trauma, if you are involved with gangs and you are involved with knives and you come from that kind of background, for a lot of these students, school is their safe space.
Yeah.
School is their safe space. So if that's their safe space, but then they are coming to school and they are being met by a threatening figure, a policeman, who they've got previous, negative encounters with, their family their whole community has. Look at how that's impacting the young person inside the school. They're not going to want to go, and they are going to want to run away.
I mean, and that thing you said there, I experienced that there, and I was the sole person on my management team who actually opposed it and said, we can't have this, we shouldn't have this, it's the wrong thing to do. And I remember saying it to the chief exec in a meeting there. I said, it's the wrong thing to do, and, would you want the police where your kids go to school? In the end, I got from him just simply, I'm the CEO, we're going to do it. But there was no wanting to understand why this might be, as you said there. All of these experiences are going to come into the equation there.
Sure.
And it was like, we're not going to try and understand our students more in terms of relationships, because that's like hard work. What we can do is to police it more. And we can't police it as heavy as we'd like because we're just teachers. So we're going to bring in this outside agency to do it for us, which is like, it's absolute madness.
We're already seeing, the negative impacts of police in schools already as well. Higher numbers of black students being disproportionately stopped and searched, being sent out of classes. It's gone into the school system where, schools, instead of having, I guess, this nurturing, pastoral kind of approach, it's a lot more of a punitive, criminalizing approach now. So we're seeing how, criminal criminal structures are then kind of feeding and seeping into school structures. I mean, if we look at, there's a recent example of the last couple of years of Child Q, who was a young black girl who was stopped and searched, and I think she was strip searched while she was on her period. And by two male police officers, with not really much explanation there, because they perceived her to have cannabis on her when she clearly she didn't. And the traumatic effects that's come from that are massive. And that's just a prime example of why police shouldn't be in schools.
Police should never be in schools. And when it tells you there about that adultification of the black child, that criminalisation of the black child, the way in which the distressed black male in particular, but black people in general, are seen as violent and aggressive, but never as distressed, and distressed therefore worthy of being, looked after. Because that's what we're asking. Because every child, we were talking about schools in particular. I used to see some figures there and have some incidences or experiences where, one on the Friday, I'll be dealing with 3 white middle-class girls who'd all been to psychiatric hospital there, and that's really unfortunate, etc. And you support them the best way you can. They'd all had support. And then on the Monday, I'd have 3 black kids who, from the age of 10, hadn't had a day in school.
That's great.
And they'd never had any counselling support. In fact, one of them, they were refused it by the psychologist there because they were too aggressive.
Did you know the most common route for the black community in seeking psychological help is through the criminal justice system? And I think that there highlights the connection between, as he says, emotional distress, psychological distress, and how it's perceived as criminal, and how it's only picked up later. When stuff has hit the fan. Right. It's not a cultural behaviour, it's not an individual behaviour, but it's based on, the psychology and what's going on in that person's background and what they've been through in their trauma.
But then what can be done about it? Because recently I was actually one Dr. Delroy, Dr. Hall, recently spoke at the Black-led churches event, and he was talking about that whole fact that as a community, I think it's about time we took back, we took responsibility for some of the things that happened to us in terms of putting in place systems that benefit us. And he just, and for me, I thought it was just, the way he said it was just gangster, man. I was just, let me tell you, I was applauding for him because this is the first time I have had somebody say within spaces where we are, and saying, we can't blame the system for every ill. We understand what the system is doing. We understand what the institutions are doing. But what can we do as a community to make better? Which is to kind of, the point I'm about to ask you, what are you hoping will happen? You get your PhD, I mean the research you are doing. How do you see the research helping in terms of how we move forward, as a community? Because nothing happens in a vacuum, in a way, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
What are your hopes?
I guess I could start by, describing what my research is.
Yes.
So, I'm researching racism within schools and how it comes to impact the mental health and the well-being of black students, but particularly looking at mental health not through the Western lens of seeing it as just, completely related to the cognitive mind and, the psychology of the mind, but understanding mental health and well-being is connected to the body through a somatic lens, what you would call it, understanding the mind to body connection. So for me, to answer your question, I think what I'm hoping to get from this research is firstly to highlight the different ways that mental health can be understood, not just through the Western lens, but looking at how it is connected to our body and our emotions and our diet and how we breathe, how we feel tension in our bodies. What does that feel like? How is that related to our environment? What's our breath like? If we walk into a school building or a work environment and our breathing is heavily shallow, as soon as we get through the doors, what does that mean? Is it just because, your breath's got short, or is it because of the environment that you're in as a black body? So with this understanding, what I'm hoping to do is then it can help guide a healing approach. And I think that that's the key thing, is as a community, with this knowledge, with this understanding, we then need to come in and heal together as a collective. Because here's another thing as well, right? Within the West, as we spoke about, it's so individualist that most healing is done on an individual based level. CBT, going to see psychiatrists, it's one-to-one, right? But what we need to understand is a lot of the trauma and a lot of the distress that we hold as a black community is not just individual trauma, but it's collective trauma. It's cultural trauma, right? So you can't heal collective trauma with individual therapy. So for me, it's about all of us as a community coming together and doing this healing as a collective practice. And for me, that needs to be the first thing. And then secondly, as I mentioned, looking at different ways of healing, not just sitting down and talking to a therapist and, which can at times be re-traumatizing, but also doing practices that connect us with our body, connect with our ancestors, connect us with spirit. And for me, that's the direction I'm wanting to take it. And we'll just see where it goes.
What would that look like on the ground? The reason why I say that, because you said there about not the individual therapy, which is what we've been brought up with in this country. I mean, I go to 2 men's groups, and I think I had to basically, and I've been going them for quite a number of years now, but I think I had to, at the beginning, work through this idea that I expected it to be individual. And actually, I was in a group setting. And a group setting where we didn't always agree, but it was a group setting where we had some things which were absolutely core to what we were. We agreed on a number of things. We agreed on the racism which exists out there. Right. That's what we did agree on. There was no, we'd have to talk
shared
about that one.
experience.
We just shared experience there. But it's, as you were talking, it made me think that as we've gone on and we've talked about loads of different things in those groups there, that actually it's been much more beneficial to me as I've got past that. But what about me? What about the I? As you said, there, the I was dominating at the beginning as opposed to the we.
The way.
Yeah, I think it's just about finding that balance, man.
Yeah.
You know, there are individual things that we need to look at, we need to kind of deep dive into and understand. But also just putting it within a context and how, you know, we are also part of a collective, we are impacted by society and the collective and culture, and where is just kind of, I guess, locating where our traumas, where our things come from. And a lot of the time it is based on a wider macro scale.
Can I ask you therefore about, we're coming near to the end now, but I'm going to ask you about In the Cut.
Right.
I know it might sound like a plug, but, you know, how does that fit into, because it was you who had the idea last year and we're doing it again this year. How does that fit into your, you know, what you've described, your broader philosophical thinking?
For sure, because once again, it's understanding the barbershop as a healing space, right? And so a lot of In the Cut is understanding, you know, In the Cut is it's a pop-up barbershop event to firstly celebrate the role of the black barbershop as a healing space.
As a healing space,
and also to bring awareness to black mental health within the community as well, right? And understanding how the barbershop in itself has been a space for years, especially in a UK context, for years, where black men can come and they can speak with their other brothers and the barber. It's a form of therapy for them in the very most informal sense. It is a form of therapy where they can just release their stress and they can find a form of reprieve. And just linking it to what you said, you know, this what the barbershop represents is not the, you know, ideal westernized version of therapy of going down and sitting and speaking to someone, but being in a space, a community space with people, with kind of, you know, laughing, joking, football on the background, you know, banter kind of flying back and forth, recognizing how the barbershop acts as a space for healing and therapy for black men, and I guess that's how it's connected. We're going to do another event 25th of November at the University of Sheffield. We're going to get, you know, 3 to 5 black barbers from the community of Sheffield, who are going to be giving out free haircuts for the black community. And as I said, once again, to raise awareness about black men's mental health, but also to celebrate the role of the black barbershop as a healing space. Yeah, man.
Actually, on that point you're talking about, do you remember the first barber you ever went to?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I actually wrote an article on this. It was Mr. T.
Mr. T.
The irony of it, right?
Yeah.
You know, Mr. T was based back on Bottom City Road at the time, in Park Hill Flats. And I must have been about 3-4 years old. And because I was my dad's barber at the time, and he picked me up, put me on the chair, and I was crying my eyes out, the whole trim. Until he spun me around and I saw it, and I was like, all right, I kind of had a cheeky smirk on my face. And then, you know, that was kind of the start of my barbershop journey. But yeah, just to kind of also to bring into the conversation that, you know, Mr. T, you know, very prominent figure within the black community, who sadly took his own life a few years ago. So this is also an important part of the conversation, because it adds to the complexity of black mental health, particularly with barbershops as well. You know, it's not romanticizing the barbershop as this, you know, wonderful place where black men can come and they come out of there and they feel free and light. That's not always the case. You know, there's so much there's a lot of complexities that are involved with the barbershop as well, particularly with barbers, because they hold a lot of this space and they hold a lot of this trauma, and then they don't have somebody to go to, right? And you'll know that from the work that you do. So it's not necessarily about romanticizing the barbershop, but it's about just showcasing and demonstrating how it can serve as a
and we are celebrating the barbers as well, and they need celebrating, because one of the things which I didn't realise until I've been going around in this job and talking to more barbers, but talking to Andrew and Kevin in particular, you go into Andrew and Kevin's and they'll know who's died.
That's it.
And, you know, when you get to a certain age, you're hearing death in a very different way, and then you hear it all the time. And I asked them, I said, how do you manage it? Because you're hearing about so many people in a week, 2 or 3 people dead in a week there. You know, you go in there and they say, guess who dead?
Yeah.
And that is quite a lot to wear on your shoulders.
It is a lot to wear on your shoulder. I mean, it's the classic, the first conversation we had at Fades, and we're asking men, when's the last time you cried? There's a gentleman who was on the chair, and he says, you know, the last time I came here, you asked me where I was going, and I said I was going to my wife's funeral.
Oh, yeah. That was the white guy.
Yeah, it was the white guy.
Yeah,
on
white
the chair.
guy
He says, I told you, and the way you interacted with me, none of my friends.
Yeah, because they stayed with it, didn't they?
Yes.
They didn't sort of go, oh my, whatever. They stayed with, you're going to your wife's funeral.
Yes, and the ability to do that, the ability to be in tune with somebody in that space, it weighs on you. And I think sometimes it's like one thing we don't really realize is that it, like we were saying, in a collective space of healing, we absorb each other's burden. We sort of like, you know, we
become one body.
Yeah, we become one. Because imagine dealing with what you're dealing on your own. Now you are in a space where you're with others, and that collectivism, that ability to say, you know what, this is our burden, we will deal with it as a collective. I think sometimes it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I think we're nearing the end now.
Oh, yeah.
That's my little pointer to
Yeah, man.
to Lungani. He usually has a final question for you, really.
Oh yeah. The final question is, so what's your thing? I mean, what's that thing that you go to actually make sure that your mental health is in check?
Yeah, that's a good question, man. I would say the body. You know, the body. You know, moving the body in the most broadest sense, moving the body, whether that's through yoga. That's what really helps me. Kind of in terms of my breath work. I try to spiritualize my yoga as much as I can as well. You know, Western yoga is very individual basis, again, very dissected from spirit and mind. So, you know, I try to kind of incorporate ancestral reverberation within my practices. That's one thing. Football, play a lot of football, that always helps me. Not just moving the body, but being in that space with my friends and playing there. Nature, being in nature and being kind of, you know, whether it's going out to the peaks or just going to the local park, that really kind of, that's my tranquil, safe space, man. And yeah, man, just being connected with God. Connected with God, man. And, you know, God means different things to different people, but in terms of just that higher being, that higher, you know, force, being connected with that and tapping into that. And yeah, man, they're probably be the things that help me.
So actually, to end, what would, if you had the opportunity to talk to your generation, what's that thing that you would leave? If today was your last, what was that thing you would love to leave to your generation?
I would say community, man. Community. I think community, especially for the Black community, is one of the most enriching kind of sources of healing and love and upliftment and energy. I think, you know, particularly my generation, we're starting to lose that. You know, my grandparents coming from Jamaica, when they come over to Sheffield, being based in Pittsmore and Burn Grieve, you know, the Black community at that time was strong, man. And over time, it's kind of dissected and it's fragmented. And for me, it's about bringing in that community, bringing in that history, knowing who you are. You know, this idea of Sankofa, knowing who you are to know where you're going, right? And I think that's what I'd love my community to kind of just to take in, man, is just being one, seeing each other as one and helping each other. Thank you.
Thank you there.
Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to be beautiful.
Yeah, you had some beautiful words there.
Yeah.
Beautiful words. Well, thank you very much, Macole.
So
Thank
what
you
do we
for
have
inviting
next
me.
time we come?
We
on?
haven't got one as yet for next time.
Have
No.
What?
I've been,
Well,
I
we'll
could
probably
give-
have to revisit. We'll have to revisit. Because I think, one person I would love to kind of have back, Dr. Hall.
Dr. Hall.
No, actually, no, that would be too soon.
Yeah, what about
I
David
think-
Campbell, the
I
businessman?
think the businessman.
Yeah, he's doing
great,
something
David Campbell.
tonight, or did something.
No,
last
that
night.
was yesterday.
Oh, it was
Yes,
yesterday
I
with,
missed it.
John,
I missed
it because I was
with
unwell. Johnny Nelson, he was
Yeah.
cheering
Was
Johnny
that last
Nelson.
night?
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
apparently it was a great event. It was a great evening.
I
yeah.
bet it was. Yes.
Yeah, because I saw Kevin this morning. He's like,
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and never miss an episode. Until next time, keep those conversations going and the clippers buzzing.